Thank you so much for joining us for this new edition of Writer's Block. I'm Jo. I'm a board member of Korean American Story, whose mission is to capture, create, preserve, and share the stories of Korean American experience. Writer's Block is our virtual community event where you can personally engage with Korean American authors and writers. This program is made possible by our monthly Storyteller Circle donors, and you can join the Storyteller Circle yourself by texting Storytellers to 44321 or by visiting our website, koreanamericanstory.org. And now I am thrilled to welcome our guest for the fourth and the last edition of Writer's Block 2022, Eric Kim. Eric Kim is a New York Times staff writer and the New York Times bestselling author of Korean American Food That Tastes Like Home, which was published last spring. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, he moved to New York to attend college and graduate school, then eventually worked his way through the literary and culinary world. Before landing at the New York Times, he has worked as a digital manager at Food Network and a senior editor at Food 52, where he amassed a devoted readership for his column, Table for One. He now hosts regular videos on New York Times Cooking's YouTube channel and writes a monthly column for the New York Times Magazine. Eric, it's so great to see you. Welcome to the Writer's Block.
It's great to see you too. I love being interviewed by Jay. This is my second or third time.
Yeah. So who else can we have at Korean American Stories Writer's Block than somebody who wrote and titled his book Korean American? So I do find this very fitting. So I did just mention that you were born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. So when did you sort of came to this realization that you're Korean American?
I've never been asked that question. When did I realize I was Korean American? I think growing up, we always called it KP. Like we were talking about 1.5 generation one of K-pop, but around the time HOT came out is when I was using those like two letters often, and especially my brother's generation. He's like a little older than me, but calling ourselves Korean American, I feel like maybe I didn't use that phrase that often. I think we just said that we were Korean. And I think it was later in life when I kind of rebelled against it and I was like, okay, actually I'm American. And then, of course, it's like every decade there's like a different realization. Now in my 30s, I can say with confidence that I'm Korean American. I always like to say that Atlanta, where I grew up, wasn't obviously Korean to me until later in life. And I just totally took it for granted. Before I came out as a homosexual, I had a girlfriend in high school, 9th and 10th grade. And we went, like one of our first dates was at this Italian restaurant. And I was very, she was really important to me. And when that restaurant closed and it was overtaken by a chicken spot, I was really upset. And I remember I had a conversation with my dad. I was like, sorry, this is a long answer to your question. But I think my dad was like, this is great. Like Atlanta's becoming so Korean and look at how amazing Koreans are. They're taking over. And I was like, oh, but that was my favorite Italian spot. But now years later, that's my favorite chicken spot. I think it's my favorite Korean fried chicken in Atlanta. It's called Joy Chicken. I say it all the time just because everyone always asks. And I generally like it. But I think I just like took for granted that there were so many Koreans around me growing up. I got to go to Korean school. I went to a Korean church. It was just such a Korean place. And it wasn't until I wrote this book and I started thinking about it and how special it was and how not ordinary it was that I was growing up in such a Korean American place.
So then why did you decide to title your book Korean American?
I think early on I had friends who thought it should be more of a personal kind of sounding title and something like my mom's kimchi fried rice or like something that was maybe specific to me. But I think what I really felt and was going through while writing this book was wanting better representation in food media and media with our stories, and which is something that Korean American Story does so beautifully. And you guys are so amazing here, everything you do. I thought I'm really glad I called it this because I remember it was the moment I saw it on the New York Times bestseller list. The two words Korean American were on that list, and that felt like a win for everyone. It kind of felt like a win for all of us. So that was really satisfying. And every time friends take pictures of this book in bookstores all across the country in all of your cities, I'm always like, oh dang, I didn't know there were books in Australia, and like I had no idea there were books in Indiana and Texas and Denver. Anyway, I that feels really good. So whenever a Korean American person walks by it, they'll be like, "Oh shit, that's me." Oh, sorry, curse word. But I think I think the title just came out because I was also just trying to define it. I didn't know how to define Korean American cooking. That was the whole point of the book, but it took getting to the end to realize the definition is pretty vast, and there kind of is no definition is my cop out answer, but
Mm.
I say it more eloquently in the book.
But we'll come back to your cookbook and food writing and more specifically, but you did go to college and then grad school to study English, and you mentioned many times that how you at one point thought you'll become like an English professor. You thought that would be. So what kind of books did you read when you were growing up, and why did you want to study English?
That's very appropriate. All the books are like behind me, I guess. These are all the books I amassed during that doctorate program. I was focusing on 20th century American literature mostly. In literature, in like literary studies, you're supposed to also, if you're a 20th centuryist, you're also kind of end up becoming a 21st centuryist. I think it's changing now because the 21st century is getting bigger. But I think I remember in high school just really loving Steinbeck and Hemingway, Faulkner. There were these authors that really spoke to me more than the other ones. And the thing that they had in common was that they were writing about America, and they were writing in the early 20th century. So I was like, okay, there's something about like 1900 to 1945 that I really like. I don't know why. There's like a style of writing. And so when I got to college, I kind of focused on that period, and I loved school, and had really amazing teachers who supported me. And it always takes like one person to like pluck you from the crowd and be like, you're a really good writer. You should like do more in this and in this to them at academia because they were professors. And so yeah, I was kind of like a teacher's pet. And then and then I went to grad school. I was just like good at school. And then I went to grad school, and I was really bad at it. I was really bad at talking. I was really bad at being an adult. I was 20 years old when I got into the program, I think, and 21 by the time I was in the program. And I left when I was 23 because I had to do this big oral exam at the end, and it was just a total failure. I just froze. I spent the whole year reading these books, and then I didn't know how to talk about them. And I felt so unprepared for life, and they gave me a low pass and I dropped out. But I'm really grateful for that, obviously, because I would never have ended up where I am now. And I don't know. I think it's so hard being a young person. You're trying to find your way, and you're trying to find something that makes you feel seen, or something that makes you feel like you can like contribute to society. Or um, I think I found a form in food writing to communicate all these things I've always wanted to say. And so yeah, that's sort of
Yeah.
what happened.
And then how did you find your way into the kitchen? When did you start cooking? What were you cooking?
I remember one of the first meals I made ever, just like solo. I was probably 13 years old. I had been baking cakes like from box mixes. My cousin was really into baking at the time, and she's 2 years older. So she sort of introduced me to that. And she also grew up with an easy bake oven, and I didn't get to have one. So it was sort of my way to like kind of flourish finally as a baker. But my first savory meal I made was for my parents' anniversary, and it was salmon with fettuccine alfredo, like cream sauce from the jar. I didn't know that you could make it from scratch. And then I think that was it. That's kind of a lot though, I think. That's like a lot of
Yeah.
that's like actually I did onion rings too. I don't know why I chose such a now I know that that's like a really kind of a involved menu. And so I made a mess of the kitchen. The onion rings were soggy. The salmon, I'd never cooked that before, but I also like needed to give them white wine. I must have like gotten it from the cupboard or something, but they had white wine, and it was probably a really horrible meal, but it was just, I think that was the beginning.
Why did you decide to cook dinner for your parents? You just wanted to be nice to them, or did you realize that it's like a gesture? What was the whole
Hmm.
reason?
Oh my God, these are great questions. I don't know. I guess like my brother and I just knew to do little things like that for our parents. It makes us sound like really good kids. But I think like I imagine a lot of other kids do that, but you know, it was exciting once I got older. It was like a little bit of freedom. Like the fact that my parents let me do that in the kitchen was a big deal, I think. And I think that's it's funny because that's still just how I pay them back now. Not pay them back, but it's how I show my gratitude because I'm a horrible gift giver. I am not, I have no forethought or foresight. So I'm never able to just like get them a gift in time that's wrapped. And like this Christmas, I was so busy that I ended up just bringing down all the gifts like unwrapped, and everyone was like, yeah, that's one step better than like what Eric usually is able to do. So what I usually do instead is just cook an elaborate meal, and I'm like a much better cook now. So I think I enjoy that. It's like that's like one thing I can do for them. Like it's one thing I can give them. It's like a really nice meal that they can't get at a restaurant. Yeah,
Mm,
and they always say, "어디 여기." They're always like, "어디서 이런 거 먹어?" They say like something like that. That's like my dad's voice.
yeah,
He's always like, "Where else could we eat this?" And that's when I know I like did it well.
right.
I
That's so
should cook the
sweet.
salmon and fettuccine alfredo for them now.
I know. Again, maybe that could be
See if they
your
remember.
next New York Times magazine column.
Oh, that's a
But
good.
yeah. But in terms of food writing, so when did you become aware of this, shall we say, a genre or a category of nonfiction writing that is, really thriving right now, called food writing? How did you discover it, and what made you think that you should give it a try?
That discovery happened so late, in my opinion. I right after dropping out of my PhD program, I started a job at Food Network, so I kind of had some like free time for the first time in my life. Like when you're a student, you always have homework, and for the first time, I got to go home at 6 o'clock, and I was done for the rest of the night. So what I actually did for the rest of the night was work on a cookbook proposal. Every night I went downstairs after work to the bar, and I sat at the bar and got like a $5 happy hour wine, and I wrote this book that was about cooking for one. And none by the end of the year, I like had a proposal. Agents didn't want it, but I had always like wanted to write a cookbook, but I didn't know that that meant um that there was this type of food writing that could supplement the recipes that was just so rigorous. I was at Food Network and reading other people's work just in my industry and just trying to like see, I kind of just wanted to know what I wanted to do next. And I think I was like searching for something. And what I found was this essay by John Birdsall. It was called America, Your Food is So Gay. If you haven't read that, that's like really great essential food writing, I think. And it won the James Beard Award. And it's about kind of how American food writing started in the 50s and 60s with James Beard, and whose book I am, resting this laptop on top of, Craig Claiborne and Richard Olney. It was sort of about the original people who started this genre, and it was women and gay men, and it was this beautiful essay that was just, it felt like nothing like I had read until then. And because when you're reading academic writing for so long, it's so dry and it's so boring and so poorly written usually. And oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a great, that link is right there in the chat. Um, anyway, so I read that and I was like, whoa, what is this? And then I read Mayuk Sen at Food 52, and this young guy doing this thing that I didn't know existed. And so I wanted his job, and eventually I got his job. Like he left and I applied to that job and I got it, but we started talking salary, and they were like, we think you should be a senior editor actually, because they were paying their staff writers shit at the time. I need to stop saying that word, sorry. And I think I went from there, and I was like practicing food writing. I'd never really reported before. I'd never interviewed people before. There was so much I hadn't done in food writing, but I I think my whole life, the one thing I was able to do was write. Like, even if I couldn't talk in grad school, or if I was bad at sports in high school, or I was bad at auditioning in middle school for, like, I don't know, orchestra or something, I would always get feedback from teachers that were like really lovely, like writing voice. And so I always held on to that. And I think it was really wonderful to get to a point in my life where I was like, I like cooking, I like writing. How do I, let's just like put them together. And so when I got to 52 and started writing for them, I think one thing that was really important was having fun with the genre and kind of playing with it for the first time. And no one was really like watching me or anything, but I think people started noticing. And so that was sort of a playground for me. And then I got a book deal, and it just all happened really quickly after that. And um I'm really grateful that I found food writing because it helped me find my voice.
Hmm. And what's really interesting in the type of writing that you do, there are like all this sort of different elements, as you mentioned. There's reporting, where you are sort of investigating whether it's Salisbury steak or sort of the history of how that recipe has developed or how people received it. So there's definitely sort of, reporting aspect, research that you do. There's also sort of the reflection part of, a lot of your stories are based on your own personal experience of what it meant to you in the past, and what it means to you now. And then, of course, there's the recipe writing, which is a very specific thing that you have to do. What you say you were always good at writing. What part sort of came to you naturally, and what part you had to like really learn in terms of how to execute it?
Sorry, I'm laughing because I feel like by now Jay and I know each other so well that, man, you guys don't know how good these questions are. She's just like setting it up for me. She's like laying the I love, you really know me well. That's like, these are really intricate questions that I know exactly how to answer because you know me. Anyway, that's really, you guys are getting a nice interview. And I'm glad she mentioned this because I think the point of this is for you guys as writers. So I hope you guys feel free to ask me anything you want. But I think one thing that really I think the really good point is that food writing is so fun because there are so many different types. And it's kind of like K-pop, where like you want to be good at singing, smizing, and dancing, or whatever, all the things that you have to do. And with food writing, I love my job right now because there's this reporting part, which is calling people, getting data. It's pretty like, or driving to the city yourself and like interviewing people and being on the ground. And that's very new to me because I've never worked at a newspaper, and that's really exciting. And I feel like Hemingway in the 20s, kind of doing a newspaper job and then writing on the side. So that's exciting and something that is a hard skill. So everyone can work on it. So it's really encouraging in that way. And the way you use that reporting really can inform your writing. Second is the personal essay writing is the thing that came to me easiest because, in theory, that's the thing that you don't need any training for. But it can get saccharine, or it can veer into a direction that doesn't do much work. And what I mean by that is I think people assume that personal essays are the easiest to write because it's the information in yourself. But I think it's one of the hardest to get right, because what I really believe about memoir writing is it should reflect the outer world and the context in which you're writing in. Like when I'm telling a story about, a personal thing, it's actually not really it's not really about me. I'm telling it so that I can say a bigger point. Sometimes the point is just something stupid, like Salisbury steak is delicious. But I think personal essay writing is the thing that I really found my stride in. And I've always been someone who could make people cry. And I think I got a taste of it when I was writing songs as like a high school student and a college student. And I would sing these songs that would make people cry in the audience. And then I was like, wow, that's that's power. And just kidding. I don't care about power, but I think power over people's emotions, or getting someone to have empathy to so that they care about you and your culture and your people. I think that's like something I feel like is a strength that I'm gonna use for good if I can, or evil. Just kidding. And then the third one is recipe writing, which is technical, and I would like to actually take a class in like technical writing to be better at it. But recipe writing is it's really different, and I think of it as like poetry, because the word count is so much smaller, and you want to be concise but also give as much information as possible. And the head note is only 100 words, or it's a short one, but you have to do a lot of work in that. You have to show the context of the recipe. You have to show how you came up with it. You want to credit every culture so you don't get accused of appropriation, and but also you should credit every culture, because nothing comes out of a vacuum. I think those are the three types of writing that exist in food writing, and that I think that's why I just like I'm in love with it. And I think if I just want to like answer any questions you guys have at the end, if you're curious about how to even get into those, but I think there's skills that you can just work on your own as well. But being on staff somewhere it helps.
So let's talk a little bit about recipe writing. What makes a recipe a good one? Is it something that's easy to follow? Just because it's easy, does that necessarily make it a good recipe? And also, when you don't know who your audience is, I guess it depends on which publication you write for. Obviously, if you're writing for something like New York Times Cooking, or let's say Food and Wine magazine, you are kind of assuming that the person is already somehow interested or invested in the process, while you would think that when you're writing just a recipe that will be posted on Food TV Network's website, where people will be just Googling something and it pops up, that will be slightly different. Or is it? First of all, what do you think is a good recipe? And do you have to sort of adjust the information that you are willing to provide based on your assumed reader?
Yeah. Great question. I feel very privileged because I get to learn from Genevieve Ko and colleagues around me who have been doing this much longer, and they teach me little things. We probably teach each other things, but like I think I'm getting a lot more than they are out of the bargain. And but when I came to the Times, I had been writing recipes that were pretty popular for Food 52, and I think people were finding success with them. But Genevieve really taught me that there's a precision that is really interesting. And recipe writing, a well-written recipe is a beautiful thing, and it's something that I think everyone has a different definition for what a good recipe is. But for me, a good one is something that someone can take and cook something really delicious to success in their own kitchen, but also something that gives them delight and joy and guides them. So I don't know, Genevieve and I often talk about the intricacies of that kind of style of communication. It's maybe like in a phone, in an app, or it's like on the page in a book, but what really matters is the physicality of it. So I think something we're always thinking about is we need to give people the information they need quickly, because cooking is quick sometimes, but we also don't want to freak people out. So there's a lot of like human psychology in it. It's like, how is someone going to feel when they read this sentence, when they look at this line, or what information will they need to know? And so and I also think what's really fun is, even though it's technical writing, you can really insert yourself in it. Like I have a certain feeling about I don't know, this is a boring example, but like the step at which you add leavener in a cookie. There's always that step where you stir the leavener, baking powder or baking soda, whatever, what have you, into the flour separately, and then you cream the butter separately. But I got to a place in my life where I was like, why do we do this? I know like why we do it, but what if you just like stir the baking soda into the butter, egg, sugar mixture first, really quick, before you add the flour? Then it feels like it just like felt less like fussy to me, because then I can go straight into one bowl. And so little things like that, where it's really fun to get to approach a recipe and be like, or a dish, and be like, I've always hated the way this thing is written. I want to change it. And sometimes I'm really grateful to my editors because they let me do that. They're sort of like, I think that's something I kind of do a lot. So they're always like, oh, Eric must have a reason for this. Sometimes it's just a typo though. I'm just like, oh no, that was a mistake. But it is nice when it's nice to be given that trust, because and sometimes there are risks that people that maybe don't go well for like certain people. And the second thing I want to say is, this is like an interesting thing that I think about sometimes, which is you can write a recipe so that it works for a lot of people, but it will taste average. And then there's a recipe that's like requires more skill in the kitchen. And if you write it more loosely, then you give people room to be intuitive cooks. I think there has to be some kind of balance, in the middle. And I don't really love writing this recipe, the kind that's like soulless, and it will work for everyone, but everyone's plate will be like basic and boring. Anyway, that's something that I think about a lot. I think the recipe form is just so fascinating, and it's a way to convey information, but it's also a way to convey cultural history and context, and that's the kind of stuff I really care about. Yeah.
So do you cook every day? Like,
Oh yeah.
and where do you get the ideas? Like, do you decide, okay, I'm gonna tackle cookies, or I'm gonna tackle one thing, and then do you just cook that one dish over and over and over again? Or like, what do you do?
I've been asked this question all year, and I feel like I always have a different answer, but I think because I cook different depending on what the dish is, but I think I have a system now. My preferred way to do it is to go ahead and cook it freely without writing it down or thinking too much about it. It's sort of, maybe I've been mulling over it for like a week, and I'll be like, oh, I really want to make a risotto, and I'll be thinking about it, and then one day I'll go to the kitchen and I'll be like, I'm hungry, I need dinner. I try to schedule my recipe test with my meals, because that's just like more realistic. And when it's not mealtime, I just like go to my desk and write, or I take a nap. But I think with recipes, I feel like I cook to think. That's just like an annoying like phrase, but I do cook to think in the way that people write to think. And so going through the motions helps me with my creativity, and it helps me like find different things and flavors. And because cooking is such an active, like, I won't call it a sport, but and I think letting that freedom into the recipe usually, and I arrive at something really fun and interesting. So it's kind of like a playground. It's really fun, the kitchen, but but not when like I did this sugar cookie for the New York Times maybe a couple of years ago, a couple of Christmases ago, and it was the one with like the raspberry frosting, and it's really tasty. But man, I think I cooked that maybe 50 to 100 times, and I was just so nervous because it was my first baked good for the New York Times, and I was really insecure about my baking at the time. I don't know. I think it's my best recipe yet. It's the thing I'm most proud of. It's like a 5-star recipe, and it works for almost everyone. But I also think it still has that surprise factor. So there's something really satisfying about being able to communicate what you're thinking, and it feels like getting to feed like a large amount of people. Maybe like virtually, but like ideally I would do it myself and give it to the person. That's like the most satisfying. But the next best thing is translating what I've cooked through the recipe. And it's kind of like, I think of it as, hey, I made this amazing thing. Now I want to tell you about it. And let's like, how do I figure out how to get you to approximate it to the closest degree in your own kitchen? So it's fun. It's a language. Yeah.
So we're gonna go to the audience questions soon, but before we do, we have this fun little thing that we do called quick fire questions. So I'm gonna just give you a very short question, unlike I've been doing so far, and then you're just gonna give me the first thing that comes to your head, okay? So here we go, the quick fire questions. What's your favorite kimchi?
Kak kimchi, the Chinese mustard greens. Yeah.
Your least favorite Korean food?
Oh my god. Okay, tteokguk. So
Really?
I know it's so important, but I think the way I get through not disliking a dish anymore is by making my own version. And I think that's the beauty of like becoming a Korean cook. You can undo like things that you didn't like growing up.
What did you not like about it?
Oh, I don't know. The tteokguk I had was at church, and it was always like, the really
Oh.
soggy, just distended rice cakes, and it was always the tashima broth, very like simple anchovy broth, and not much flavor, and I just never liked it. But I knew that I had to eat it for some
You
reason.
had to, yeah, if
I
you're
had to.
gonna get 1 year older.
Yeah.
Most overrated ingredient, in your opinion?
Mm. A lot of people know this about me, but I really hate diamond crystal kosher salt. I can't say I really hate, but I just don't use it. It's only because I'm not used to it. I'm used to coarse kosher salt, Morton salt, and everyone in the studio I work with when I make videos know that I don't like it, and so I sound like a diva, but I think you should use the salt that you're used to, and I'm used to coarse kosher salt, and every time I do diamond crystal, it just doesn't taste right to me. Like it's like so not salty enough.
Most underrated ingredient?
I say tenjang every opportunity I get, and I think I'm preaching to the choir because most people here know tenjang and probably love it, but like tenjang can save the world, and I wanna like I'll be behind any marketing campaign behind it to get it onto shelves at Whole Foods.
Do you listen to music when you write or cook?
Yeah, all the time. When I write, I usually listen to ASMR, actually.
Oh,
Like whispering, tapping sounds, or eating sounds. I have that
Really?
playing, so I'm like very like relaxed while I write, because writing is very stressful, as you all probably know. When I cook, I listen to podcasts. Were we talking about Feeling Asian before? Yeah, I was just listening to that today. I just really love that podcast, and they're ending soon. And so these final episodes are just so epic. So go check out Feeling Asian, two Korean comedians who are two of the most emotionally intelligent people I've ever met.
the book or books you have on your bedside table right now?
Oh my God. Bedside table. Okay.
Yeah.
So I can read it from here. I have Lot by Brian Washington. I think that's Crazy Rich Asians, actually. I don't know why. I have Close Range, which is a collection of short stories by Annie Proulx that I really like. Brokeback Mountain's in that. And I have Seeing Ghosts. And I have Min Jin Lee's Free Food for Millionaires. I have really bad eyes, too. Oh, and then on my right side, I have a list of cookbooks this high for research and I'm trying to find columns and stuff. Yeah.
3 authors you'd like to have dinner with, dead or alive?
I'd like to cook for Nigella Lawson, I think. Mangchi had me over for dinner. I think I'm allowed to say that. I'm usually pretty private about my private life, but she had me over for dinner one night, and I really want to repay the favor because I think we cook very differently. But anyway, I would love to feed her. Who else do I want to feed? Oh, I have a huge crush on Tiffany Young. Sonoshi the Tiffany. She's my favorite. I hope to interview her someday for like a profile. But I'm very fascinated by her, and she's sort of my like, my queen. Yeah, I like her a lot. I never talk about it, but like, she kind of feels like a Tongup or something. We're like
Yeah.
the same age, so.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Oh, I've always wanted to levitate. It's like fly. Yeah, I was a big fan of Charmed growing up, and I thought Phoebe's active power was the coolest. She would like levitate above ground, and I used to fantasize about that.
And the last one, in your next life, what would you like to come back as?
A dog, probably. I think being a human is hard. and my dog has a sweet life, and I think I would like enjoy being a dog. I think it'd be a good dog.
So we're gonna go to some of the audience submitted questions. So Scarlett asks, what is your favorite piece you've written? And what is your least favorite piece you've written, and why?
Oh, wow. Oh, my favorite piece so far and it's because it's fresh in mind, but I wrote about Brunswick stew, and it's sort of in this series of like long reported pieces I'm trying, and I just really love my job and my editors because they're constantly like challenging me, and they're like, what do you want to do? And I love that story because it just started from the ground up, like driving a car from Brunswick, Georgia to Brunswick County, Virginia, and trying to find a story, but also trying to find people who who have interesting things to say about this very regional dish. I'm just really proud of the writing. It's not personal, but it was a lot of work, and it felt like turning in a final exam that got an A plus because I don't know, people read it and that felt good. And the least favorite, I have a recent piece that I didn't like as much just because I kind of, didn't have that much time to do it, but it's part of being a staff writer, I think. And I think I don't want to say what it is because a lot of people worked on it really hard, and I don't want to but it's mostly on me. It was a piece that I think people enjoyed, but it wasn't like I wouldn't put it in like a portfolio of my best writing.
That's fair. Hyung asks, thank you for your book. The stories really spoke to me as a Korean immigrant growing up in the South, Houston, Texas. What were your main hopes and fears and reservations in writing a book that is both boldly Korean and American? Cooking is my love language too.
I think my main hope with this book was for people to read it and to just understand the importance of keeping an open definition of identity. I think the words authenticity and representation, and that's all like front of mind for me when I was writing the book, and gave me a lot of anxiety. By extension, just like writing about Korean food at all for any publication used to like give me nightmares. Like I got shingles once because I was so stressed about a piece. And I was like so worried about representing other Koreans correctly. And I think writing the book gave me some confidence. It gave me a little more expertise, but it also gave me a more open idea about how I can write about Korean food with by defining it with emotional intelligence and not like labels. And that's something I really want people to look at it. But I'll say that anytime an Amazon review is like negative, it's always by a Korean person who doesn't think it's Korean enough, the book. And I don't know what to say to that because the book's called Korean American. And I often go around saying it's not a Korean cookbook, it's an American cookbook because Korean is an adjective for American and blah, blah, blah. And it's a third identity. And I think opening people's minds, but also like our own community's minds about what that definition is was really hard. People don't like you like saying something about your culture that you don't identify with, like, or your family. It's something as simple or innocuous as like, my mom doesn't fry kimchi like that, so that's not correct, or kimchi fried rice or whatever. And then so yeah, there's a lot of that I had to deal with, but it's all about drowning out that kind of noise. And I know that I'm doing more good than bad by the work I do. And I think about canon a lot. Like the reason I was reading Steinbeck in college and grad school was because I didn't understand the kind of disjunctive space between his popularity as like a writer in his time and later, and the academy's lack of like respect for it. Like it's like high school literature. And I wondered why people didn't take him more seriously in these ivory towers that I don't give a shit about anymore. But I think from then on I've always been sort of aware that people have hierarchies of value and that are really harmful. And so that's something that I'm always thinking about and trying to fight against.
Speaking of like people's response to you, I mean, especially with, for example, New York Times cooking app, which I use all the time, but there's all these people. I mean, the moment you post it, there are people responding, like making comments about it. And you sometimes go like, did you really have time to really cook that? And some of them are just not nice, to be honest. And some of them are like, oh, I changed this and that and that and that and that, and it was good. Which, I mean, everybody has their freedom to do whatever they want. But how do you read them? Do you do you think about them? Are there any of them that are helpful to your mental health? I mean, how do you deal with this like instantaneous responses that you get from strangers?
I think earlier in my tenure here at the Times, I really enjoyed reading the comments because I was just curious. I was like, this is so fascinating. But over time, I realized it wasn't great for my mental health because I mean something it's not, not necessarily comments about like the recipe, like that stuff that's pretty interesting actually. And I just love I think of the comment section as like a sociology. It's like, but it's my own little world. It's like the world of my recipe. And like I get to be like, I put this recipe out in the world and all these people are cooking it. What are they doing? It's sort of like you're watching an experiment happen. And so I check back once in a while. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I think so I learn a lot from that. It's like research and I like that. But I realized, and this is the part of me that I'm trying to hold back and trying not to go there, but I've become more cynical. I've become more cynical about humanity and like uh, the emotional intelligence of humans, but also of this notion that even though I'm putting out a kimchi recipe or like a tenjang stew or like a beans and greens dish that has tenjang as a main ingredient, my effort is for people to like go out and learn about tenjang and our culture and our people. But what ends up happening is sometimes is people are like, this is so good. I use miso instead. And then everyone starts using miso only. And then the point of that. But then once in a while, there's someone who's like, wow, I just discovered tenjang thanks to this recipe. Like, thank you. It's like that's really valuable. But it's kind of like a video game. And I like video games. It's sort of like what is going to make people buy gochugaru, and turns out it was salmon, and that was really cool. That felt good. And freeze-dried raspberries were flying off the shelves at the time. I was it was like in the beginning when I was experiencing this for the first time, and I just thought it was so cool because I was in Georgia in my mom's house, like wearing pajamas all day, and meanwhile supermarket shelves are sort of like selling out of this really kind of esoteric ingredient that is pretty widespread because it's become this like health food. It's in the health food aisle usually. But I was at Whole Foods and I was like, the shelf was out of the freeze-dried raspberries, and I went to the cashier and I was like, have you noticed more sales of these like freeze-dried raspberries? Like, where'd they go? And she's like, yeah, do you know why? Like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. And then in my mind, I'm like, I hope it's because of my recipe. But anyway, so I think what's what helps me is to maybe not read the comments, but I do enjoy like once in a while stepping out into the real world and seeing the effects of like something as big as the Times. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
And Katie asks, how do you start your process with writing that's personal?
Personal writing is so hard. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but you start writing a story that's a personal essay and it just feels like a diary entry. And I think that's maybe the point, like to edit it enough so that it is no longer a diary entry and it's more of a letter to the world, or it needs to be like have some purpose that's bigger than just like telling your sob story. So I think my process is that I am anxious about it and I don't do it until it's like due, and then the deadline passes, and then and then I'm scrambling, and then suddenly it locks into place like an hour before my second deadline is like coming up, and I'm just sort of just kind of like comes out sometimes. I don't know. I keep being rewarded for my procrastination, and because I work and I write in like pressurized environments, and but I don't think it's healthy. I'm trying to get better at like writing progressively because I have like a longer book project now, and it's like I need to do more in advance instead of all the last minute stuff. But my joke is that I've just been in school since I was 5 years old, and it's never changed. I still have to write essays. They're due at a certain time, and then I have to ask for extensions, and you either get an A or you get like a C. But the person who's grading it is like yourself. So it's devastating. Yeah.
Mm. So what's next for you? Keep writing for, and you just mentioned you have a project that you've been working on. So
Yeah. I'm really excited. I feel like I kind of my obsessions intellectually, they happen in like the course of 2 3 years, and I had 2 3 years where I was obsessed with cooking for one and loneliness and solitude. That was like a column for 52, and then after that was Korean American. I was really interested in exploring Korean culture, Korean food, and I think I got to do that for like 2 3 years, and then nostalgia was sort of this interesting thing that I was curious about. So I think for the last couple of years, my columns have all been have had something to do with nostalgia, touching on some indice of like nostalgia. And then now I think what I'm really excited about is multi-plot. I'm really fascinated. It's like a fictive device in novels that, it's like Cloud Atlas or like any of those novels that start with multiple storylines and then they just converge at the end. Crash is a good example of that. The film, that won an Oscar. But I love writing about the intersections of multiple plots in real life, and that's why in my reporting I love finding where people connect, where very disparate people connect, and that's something that's really fascinating to me. And I think it's just like my next obsession. So I'm working on a collection of essays. So that's something that I'm really excited about. Yeah, and each essay will end in a recipe, and so it's still like food related, but they're more culture pieces now, I think. Yeah.
Great. And last question, what do you do with leftovers after all that cooking?
Oh man, I get to bring it to work now. I used to not be able to, but I bring it to work. I try to get my like neighbors to eat my food, but I don't think they like know what I do or who I am. So when some stranger is like in the Facebook, or it's like, hey, does anyone want some stew? Like my Brunswick stew, which is like it's really good. Like, oh, and I'm not a bad cook, and no one took it. No one wanted it. It was like, why would we want some random guy's leftover like tomato chicken stew? And I was like, and then I don't know, maybe they saw it in the paper later and didn't even realize that that's what I was talking about. Anyway, I think I just try to give it away when I can. I have a very small fridge, so but sometimes I turn it into like fried rice. I feel like everything can be fried rice, you know?
That's true. But I think basically everybody on this Zoom call, probably Zoom room, would probably want to be your neighbor and be your leftovers.
I would love that.
And thanks to everyone for attending this edition of Writer's Block. Korean American Story will broadcast this program for you to watch again. So let others know about it too. And make sure you follow Korean American Story on Instagram, Facebook, or sign up for email so that you don't miss any of the upcoming events, such as the Writer's Block 2023. We'll be back in February 2023. I need to get used to saying that word. With the first one will be a very interesting one. We'll have a literary agent on this program to get any questions from you if you're aspiring writer, and find out about what a literary agent do and can do for you. Korean American Story is a nonprofit organization, which means we are counting on your financial support. And you can join the Storytellers Circle by becoming a monthly donor. Just $10 a month enables us to launch new programs like the Writer's Block. $25 a month supports the complete production of one K-pop episode. So please text Storytellers to 44321 or visit our website, koreanamericanstory.org. You'll also have the option to make a one-time donation and find out many ways you can get involved. And once again, thanks everybody. And thank you, Eric. We wish you all the best. And thanks to the staff members of the Korean American Story for making this event a virtual reality. And happy reading and happy cooking to everyone. Thanks.